Millionaire CEO gave her 24 hours to leave. 5 years later, he'd give anything for a minute with them. A very beautiful story for a beautiful family, especially my beautiful sisters and daughter. Watch till the end, and don't forget to press the like button. It supports me. Let's start together. There are two kinds of lonely in this world, the kind that comes from having nothing, and the kind that comes from having everything except what matters. Kayla Bonita had learned to read rooms the way some people read books. The conference room on the 47th floor was all glass and steel, filled with people whose watches cost more than her entire year's rent, and she could feel every eye measuring her worth in borrowed confidence and a resume that screamed, "Not one of us." She'd bought her blazer at a thrift store, pressed it until the creases looked intentional, and walked into Salt Global Enterprises knowing she didn't belong, but refusing to let that stop her. The position was junior analyst. She'd applied because the rent was due and her mother's medication wasn't getting cheaper. But when they handed her the case study during the group interview, something shifted in her chest. The proposal was about acquiring a chain of neighborhood stores in struggling districts, flipping them into premium outlets, pricing out the communities that had kept them alive for generations. "This is genocide with a profit margin," she said. And the room went silent. The man at the head of the table, who'd been scrolling through his phone with the bored expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 desperate candidates, looked up. Phil Salt was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with eyes that seemed to calculate your value before you finished speaking. He set his phone down slowly. "Explain. You want to take stores that sell baby formula and insulin, places where people buy bread on credit because the owner knows their grandmother's name, and turn them into boutique markets selling imported olive oil and craft beer. You'll create jobs, sure, for people who already have them. But the families who need those stores, they'll take 2 buses to find somewhere that doesn't treat survival like a luxury. That's not growth. That's erasure." The woman to Phil's left, some executive with a smile like broken glass, leaned forward. "We're here to create value, not run charities." "No," Kayla said, meeting her stare. "You're here to extract value. There's a difference. You could create community partnerships, sliding scale pricing, local hiring initiatives. You could make money and leave something standing. But that requires seeing people as more than obstacles to your profit." The executive laughed, cold and dismissive. "Thank you for your perspective. We'll be in touch." Kayla stood, gathered her portfolio, and walked toward the door. She'd blown it. Said too much, cared too loud, forgot that places like this rewarded silence and ambition, not truth. "Wait." Phil's voice stopped her at the threshold. He was standing now, buttoning his jacket with the kind of precision that suggested every movement was deliberate. "Everyone else leave. I need the room." The executives exchanged glances but filed out, the woman with the broken smile pausing to whisper something sharp that Phil ignored. When the door clicked shut, he crossed to the window, hands in his pockets, staring at the city below like it was a puzzle he'd already solved but kept trying to solve better. "You're not wrong," he said finally, "about the proposal. It's efficient, profitable, and completely soulless. Then why approve it? Because that's what we do here. We find things that aren't working and make them work. We don't ask if we should, just if we can." He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something other than calculation in his expression. Exhaustion, maybe, or recognition. "You said we could do both. Make money and leave something standing. Show me how. I'm here for a junior analyst position. You're here because you need a job, and I need someone who'll tell me the truth even when it costs them. I'm creating a new role, Director of Community Impact. Your job is to make sure we stop being the villains in our own story. Interested?" Kayla stared at him, searching for the trap, the fine print, the inevitable catch. "Why?" "Because I've spent 10 years building an empire, and I can't remember the last time I felt good about it. Because everyone in my life tells me what I want to hear, and you walked in here and told me what I needed to hear. Because I'm tired of being lonely in a room full of people. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it away. So, do you want the job or not? She should have said no. Should have sensed the danger in a man who built walls for a living, suddenly offering to tear one down. But the rent was due, and her mother needed medication, and something in his voice sounded like her own heart. I want the job. The months that followed were war disguised as work. Kayla drafted proposals that prioritized people alongside profit, and Phil's board fought her at every turn. She learned to navigate their world without becoming part of it, to speak their language while keeping her own. Phil backed her plays, overruled his executives, started asking questions like, "Who does this help?" instead of, "How much does this make?" They worked late mostly, the office emptying out until it was just them and the city lights and conversations that started about community economics and ended somewhere deeper. She learned he'd grown up in boarding schools after his parents died, raised by staff who were paid to care. He learned she'd raised her brothers after her mother's stroke, that she knew every corner store owner in her neighborhood by name, because that's what survival looked like when you couldn't afford anonymity. "You ever feel like you're performing?" he asked one night, loosening his tie like it was strangling him. They were in his office, rain streaking the windows, a half-eaten takeout dinner between them. Every single day. Like if I stop smiling or working or proving I belong, someone's going to realize I don't. I grew up in rooms where emotions were treated like malfunctions. Grief, joy, fear, all of it was something to manage, never express. And now I run a company worth billions, and I can't remember the last time I felt anything that wasn't calculated. He looked at her then, really looked, not as an employee but as a person. "Except when I'm around you. You make me feel everything, and it's terrifying." Kayla's breath caught. "Phil, I know it's inappropriate. I know I'm your boss, and this crosses every line. But I need you to know that these months working with you, being challenged by you, it's the first time I've felt awake in years." She should have kept it professional. Should have remembered power dynamics and workplace ethics and all the smart reasons to keep her distance. But she'd been feeling the same pull, the same magnetic inevitability, and when he stood and crossed to her, she didn't step back. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "The worst," he agreed, and kissed her like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe, and she was oxygen. The affair, if you could call it that when it felt more like recognition than betrayal, unfolded in stolen hours and careful distance. They kept it secret, not from shame, but from wanting to protect something pure before the world turned it into scandal. He took her to his estate in the countryside, where there were no titles or hierarchies, just two people learning to be unguarded. She brought him to her neighborhood, introduced him to her brothers, showed him the beauty in struggle he'd never had to understand. "Marry me," he said one morning in her kitchen, coffee cooling between them, both still in yesterday's clothes. "You're insane." "Probably. But I don't want to do any of this without you. Not the company. Not the life. None of it means anything if I'm doing it alone. I'm not offering you wealth or status or any of that. I'm offering you me, flawed and damaged and trying to learn how to be human. Say yes." She said yes. They married quietly, just her brothers as witnesses and a promise that felt bigger than vows. For months, it was everything. Passion and partnership and the kind of love that rewrites your understanding of possible. He funded her brother's education without being asked. She humanized his empire, pushed for programs that treated employees like people instead of resources. They conceived precious during a weekend when the world felt small enough to hold in their hands. Both of them tangled together, making promises they believed they'd keep forever. But forever doesn't ask permission before it starts breaking. Chapter 2. The Promise. Love doesn't fail in a moment. It fails in 1,000 small surrenders neither person recognizes until it's already gone. Kayla knew something was shifting before she could name it. It started with dinners, interrupted by phone calls Phil took in the other room, his voice dropping to that clipped, professional tone that meant whoever was calling mattered more than whoever was waiting. It continued with mornings where he left before sunrise and returned after midnight, his side of the bed barely disturbed, his kiss on her forehead distracted and obligatory. "Talk to me," she said one evening, catching him as he poured scotch instead of joining her for the meal she'd spent 2 hours preparing. "Nothing to talk about. Just work." "It's always work lately. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you looked at me like I was more than another task to manage?" He set the glass down hard enough that liquid sloshed over the rim. "You want me to look at you? Fine, I'm looking. What do you see? A man trying to hold together an empire while everyone around him has opinions about how he should do it better, including you. That's not fair, isn't it? You pushed for those community programs, and now the board is questioning every decision I make. Shareholders are pulling funding, competitors smell blood, and everyone keeps asking why I let my wife influence strategy." The word "let" hung between them like a blade. Kayla felt something crack inside her chest. "I'm not your wife when it's convenient, and your employee when it's not. You asked me to make this place better. I'm doing that. At what cost? I'm losing control of my own company because I wanted to play hero with you." Play hero? You think that's what this is? I'm fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, and you used to believe in that. What happened to the man who said he was tired of being the villain? He woke up and remembered villains build empires. Heroes just feel good about themselves while everything burns. Kayla stared at him, this stranger wearing her husband's face, and felt the ground shifting beneath her. "Who's been talking to you? Because this isn't you. Maybe you never knew who I was. Maybe you fell in love with potential instead of reality, and now you're disappointed I'm not who you wanted me to be." "No. I fell in love with a man brave enough to question himself. And I'm watching him disappear into the scared boy who thinks vulnerability equals weakness." He drained the scotch, poured another. "I have a meeting. It's 8 o'clock at night. Then I guess I'm busy." He left her standing in the kitchen with cold food and colder silence. And something inside Kayla whispered, this was only the beginning. She didn't know about Sullivan Bradford yet. The man who'd mentored Phil since his parents died, who was systematically poisoning their marriage with carefully placed doubts and edited reports. She didn't know Phil was drowning in a hostile takeover attempt, convinced that showing weakness, even to his wife, would be the crack that shattered everything. All she knew was the man she loved was slipping away, and she couldn't reach him through the walls he was rebuilding faster than she could scale them. The pregnancy was a secret growing inside her body alongside the fear. She'd found out a few weeks ago, sat in a clinic bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines, while joy and terror warred in her chest. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him. Some evening when he wasn't exhausted or angry, when they could hold each other and dream about the future instead of fighting about the present. But the right moment never came. She tried again on a Sunday morning, his one day off, catching him in the home office where he'd been working despite promising her they'd spend the day together. "Phil, I need to talk to you about something important." He didn't look up from his laptop. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of reviewing these reports." "No, it can't wait. It's been waiting, and I need you to just stop working and be here with me for 5 minutes. He sighed. That specific exhale that communicated her needs were an inconvenience, but closed the laptop. "Okay, what?" The words dissolved on her tongue. How could she tell him about the life they'd created when he could barely stand to be in the same room with her? How could she share this miracle when he looked at her like she was a problem to solve? "Never mind. It can wait. Kayla, I said it can wait." She left before he could see her crying, before he could witness how completely he was breaking her heart in pieces too small to gather back together. Sullivan Bradford came for dinner that week, uninvited but welcomed by Phil like he was oxygen itself. The older man had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. The polished charm of someone who'd learned manipulation was more effective than honesty. He treated Kayla with courteous dismissal, like a child playing dress-up in adult spaces. "Your programs are quite ambitious," Sullivan said over appetizers, the word ambitious delivered like an insult wrapped in compliment. "Though I worry about sustainability, heart over head rarely builds lasting foundations." "Heart and head aren't enemies," Kayla replied, matching his smile with one just as false. "We can be profitable and ethical. They're not mutually exclusive." "Of course not. Though I notice your initiatives have coincided with our first quarterly loss in 7 years. Correlation isn't causation naturally, but boards do love their patterns." Phil shifted uncomfortably. "Sullivan, I'm simply saying what others are thinking. Your wife is brilliant, no question, but perhaps her expertise lies outside fiscal strategy." "No shame in that." Kayla set down her fork carefully, precisely, fighting the urge to throw it. "My expertise lies in understanding what happens when companies treat communities like resources to extract." "You want to talk fiscal strategy? Let's discuss long-term brand loyalty, consumer trust, and the cost of repairing a reputation after you've destroyed the neighborhoods that supported you. Those losses show up differently on spreadsheets, but they're just as real." Sullivan's smile tightened. "Passionate. Phil mentioned you were passionate." After he left, Kayla cornered Phil in the kitchen. "Why do you let him talk to me like that?" "Like what?" "He was perfectly respectful. He was perfectly condescending. He's trying to turn you against me, and you're letting him." "Not everything is a conspiracy, Kayla. Sullivan has been in my life since my parents died. He taught me everything I know. Maybe you could try trusting that he has my best interests at heart. And I don't?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm kitchen. "I'm pregnant." The words came out flat, defeated, nothing like the joyful announcement she'd imagined. Phil froze mid-reach for a glass, his hand suspended in air, like he'd forgotten how to complete the motion. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months. I was waiting to tell you, but clearly waiting for the right time means waiting forever, since you can barely stand to talk to me anymore." He turned slowly, and she searched his face for joy, fear, anything recognizing the magnitude of what she'd just said. Instead, she found calculation, that familiar expression he wore when processing information that complicated his plans. "Are you sure?" "Am I sure?" "Yes, Phil, I'm sure. I've taken 6 tests and seen a doctor and heard the heartbeat. Our baby has a heartbeat. So yes, I'm sure. This isn't a good time." The words landed like a physical blow. Kayla actually stepped backward, hand instinctively moving to her stomach in protection. "There's never going to be a good time for you. There's always going to be another crisis, another deal, another reason why anything real has to wait." "That's not what I meant. We're in the middle of everything and adding a baby right now." "Adding? Like this is an item on your calendar? This is our child. This is what we talked about, what we wanted, what you wanted. I never said I was ready to be a father. You said you wanted to build a life with me. Children are part of that life. Maybe I changed my mind." The silence that followed was the kind that swallows sound, where even breathing feels too loud. Kayla stared at this man she'd married, this stranger who'd replaced him, and felt something inside her go numb. "Get out," she whispered. "What?" "Get out. Sleep somewhere else tonight. I can't look at you right now." He left, climbed the stairs to a guest room like she'd asked, and part of her died when he didn't fight back, didn't insist on staying and fixing what he'd just broken. She sat on the kitchen floor, hand on her belly, and talked to the baby growing inside her. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry your father is a coward. But I promise I'll be enough for both of us. I'll love you bigger than his absence. I'll build us a life that doesn't need him to be whole." She didn't know she'd already started keeping that promise, didn't know the worst was still coming, that the real breaking point was still weeks away. All she knew was something had fractured that couldn't be unfractured. and she needed to decide if she was going to spend her life trying to fix a man who didn't want to be saved. The decision made itself the night. Phil came home drunk with Sullivan's poison fresh in his bloodstream, and his patience finally shattered. Chapter 3. The Poison. They don't destroy you with violence. They destroy you with whispers, doubts planted so carefully you think they're your own thoughts. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday and Kayla wasn't invited. That should have been her first warning. She'd attended strategy meetings for months, had earned her place in rooms where decisions shaped futures. But Sullivan had been working behind closed doors, building his case with the methodical patience of someone who understood power wasn't seized, but cultivated. Phil came home that evening different. Not angry, which she could have fought, but distant in a way that felt permanent. He poured scotch, loosened his tie, and stared at financial reports spread across the dining table like they were scripture, and he was looking for salvation. "They want you out," he said without preamble. Kayla, who'd been preparing dinner as an olive branch, set down the knife carefully. "Who does?" "The board." Sullivan presented an analysis of company performance before and after you came on board. Revenues down 18%. Stock prices dropped after we implemented your community initiatives. Shareholders are threatening to pull funding. Revenue is down because we're in transition. Long-term sustainability doesn't happen overnight. That's what I said. They don't care about long-term. They care about quarterly returns and media coverage questioning my judgment. Media coverage you could correct by standing behind what we've built, instead of letting them paint me as the wife who doesn't understand business. He drained the scotch, poured another. "Maybe you don't." The words hung between them, quiet and devastating. Kayla felt her pulse in her throat, tasted copper. "Say that again. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You understand communities and social impact. That's valuable. But running a company requires different skills, different priorities. Sullivan thinks. Of course. What does Sullivan think, Phil? That your wife is too stupid to understand profit margins? That I'm some charity case you hired to feel better about yourself? He thinks you're well-intentioned, but out of your depth. And looking at the numbers, he might be right." Kayla laughed, hollow and sharp. "Those numbers don't account for brand rebuilding, consumer loyalty, or the lawsuits we avoided by treating employees like humans. But sure, reduce everything I've done to a quarterly loss and pretend that's the whole story." "I'm not pretending anything. I'm looking at reality." "No, you're looking at Sullivan's version of reality. When did you stop thinking for yourself? When did you start letting him make decisions about our lives, our marriage?" He's not making decisions. He's offering perspective from someone who actually built something instead of criticizing how others build. The cruelty of it stole her breath. Kayla had to grip the counter to stay standing, her knuckles white and shaking. "Is that really what you think? That I haven't built anything? I built us, Phil. I built a life where you felt safe enough to be human. I built programs that changed actual lives while your board counted money. And now you're standing here letting that man erase all of it because facing him is harder than facing me. Maybe facing you is the problem. Maybe I can't think clearly when you're around, when every decision has to be filtered through how it affects you and your feelings and your vision of what this company should be." "Then what do you want? You want me to quit? To disappear so you can go back to being the man who felt nothing and called it strength?" He met her eyes finally, and what she saw there was worse than anger. It was indifference. "I want you to give me space to figure out if this marriage was a mistake." The baby, their baby, kicked for the first time in that moment, a flutter against Kayla's ribs like a question she couldn't answer. She pressed her hand to her stomach, protective and desperate. "I'm carrying your child. I know. And you still just said our marriage was a mistake." "I said I need to figure out if it was. There's a difference." "No, there isn't. Because the man I married would never question us, would never let anyone make him doubt what we built. You're not figuring anything out, Phil. You're letting Sullivan poison you against me because it's easier than admitting you're scared. Scared of what? Of being loved, of being seen, of having someone in your life who expects you to be more than a bank account with a heartbeat. Her voice cracked. I see you, the real you, not the performance you give the world, and that terrifies you more than any hostile takeover ever could. He turned away, refilled his glass with shaking hands. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am scared. But at least I'm honest about it. Honest? You've been lying to both of us for months, pretending everything's fine while you let Sullivan feed you doubts. Coming home and going through motions instead of showing up. You want to talk about honest? Try looking me in the eye and telling me you still love me. The silence stretched too long. Long enough that she understood before he spoke, before he confirmed what his hesitation had already answered. When he finally turned back, his face was composed, emotionless. The mask he wore in boardrooms when negotiating with people he planned to destroy. I don't know if I do. Kayla nodded slowly, something inside her crystallizing into diamond-hard clarity. Then I'll make this easy for you. I'll leave, not because you're right, but because I refuse to beg someone to love me. I refuse to shrink myself small enough to fit into your coward's life. Kayla? No. You don't get to say my name like it means something after you just said loving me might have been a mistake. You don't get to have it both ways. She walked upstairs, each step deliberate and final, and began packing. Not everything. She didn't have the energy or the heart, just enough to survive the immediate future. Clothes, documents, the photograph of them on their wedding day when promises still felt permanent. She heard him follow, heard him pause in the doorway. Where will you go? Anywhere that isn't here. She zipped the suitcase, faced him one last time. I want you to know something. This baby, she's going to be extraordinary. She's going to grow up knowing her mother chose her, fought for her, built a life worth living even when everything fell apart. And if you're very lucky, if you somehow find your spine and remember who you were before Sullivan turned you into his puppet, maybe one day you'll get to meet her. But you'll have to earn it. You'll have to prove you're capable of being the father she deserves, not the coward I'm seeing right now. You can't keep my child from me. Watch me. You gave up the right to her the moment you questioned if we were a mistake. I'm not keeping her from you. You're choosing not to know her. There's a difference. She lifted the suitcase, walked past him, down the stairs, toward the door that led to anywhere but here. Her hand was on the handle when his voice stopped her, slurred with scotch and something that might have been panic. I'm giving you 24 hours. She turned, confused. But the 24 hours to decide if you're with me or against me. If you walk out that door now, don't come back. But if you stay, if you fight for us instead of running, maybe we can fix this. Kayla stared at him. This man holding their marriage hostage like it was a negotiation, giving her an ultimatum as if he had any right. And she saw with terrible clarity that he'd already made his choice. This was just him making her the villain, making her the one who left so he could tell himself he'd tried. You want me to fight for us? I've been fighting for us while you let Sullivan tell you I'm the enemy. I'm done fighting alone. She opened the door, felt the cold air rush in. 24 hours. You can have forever. I'm not coming back. She left him standing in the doorway of a house that had never really been theirs. Walked into the night carrying his child and her dignity, and didn't look back, even when she heard him call her name. Not because she didn't love him, she did, desperately. The way you love something that's killing you, but because she loved herself and her unborn daughter more. Behind her, Phil Salt stood in the doorway of his empty empire, watching the only real thing he'd ever had disappear into darkness, and told himself he'd made the right choice. He'd spend the next 5 years learning how wrong he was. Chapter 4. The Ultimatum. The breaking doesn't happen when someone walks away. It happens when you realize they're not coming back. Kayla's brother opened the door at 2 in the morning to find his sister standing on the porch. suitcase at her feet and something shattered in her eyes he'd never seen before. He didn't ask questions, just pulled her inside and made up the couch and sat with her until the shaking stopped. What happened? Everything. Nothing. I don't want to talk about it. You're pregnant. She looked up sharply. How did you? You're glowing even while you're crying. And you've got that hand-on-belly thing going even though you probably don't realize you're doing it. How far along? 4 months next week. I was going to tell you after I told him properly. Guess that plan's dead. Her brother sat beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Does he know? He knows. He called it bad timing. Like our baby is a scheduling conflict. She laughed, ugly and wet. Then he gave me an ultimatum. 24 hours to decide if I'm with him or against him, like our marriage is a contract negotiation. What an absolute piece of... Don't. I don't have the energy to hate him right now. I just need to figure out what comes next. What came next was survival in its rawest form. Kayla called Salt Global Enterprises the following Monday, professional and composed, asking to speak with Phil about transitioning her projects. The receptionist put her on hold for 15 minutes, then came back with words that felt like a physical assault. Mr. Salt is unavailable. However, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. Security will collect your access cards and personal items from your office. A severance check will be mailed within the week. I need to speak with him directly. Mr. Salt has asked that all communication go through our legal department. Here's the number. Kayla hung up. Tried his personal cell, disconnected. His email bounced back with an auto-reply about being unreachable. Even his assistant, sweet Rachel, who'd always snuck her extra coffee, responded to her message with a formal statement about directing inquiries through proper channels. He'd erased her, completely, efficiently, the way you delete files you don't want found. The severance check arrived 3 days later, signed by Sullivan Bradford, for an amount that was technically generous, but felt like an insult. Like he was paying her to disappear quietly, to not make a scene, to accept her dismissal from his life with grace and gratitude. She deposited the check because pride doesn't pay rent, but she didn't cash it right away. Kept it in her wallet, like evidence of something she couldn't name yet, proof that this had happened, that she hadn't imagined their entire relationship. Finding work should have been straightforward. She had experience, credentials, a resume that sparkled. But every interview followed the same pattern. Enthusiasm, until they looked her up online, found the articles about her time at Salt Global, the society pages showing her at events with Phil. Then came the questions that weren't quite questions. We noticed you worked at Salt Global. Why did you leave? Mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. And your relationship with Mr. Salt. There were rumors about a personal connection. How would that impact your objectivity here? My work speaks for itself. My personal life is separate, but it wasn't, could never be, not when his name was attached to hers in every search result. Employers saw liability, drama, the messy intersection of business and romance. They said they'd call back. They never did. Kayla's savings evaporated with terrifying speed. Rent, prenatal care, food, utilities, everything cost more than she remembered from before, when Phil's wealth had insulated her from the daily mathematics of survival. She moved to a smaller apartment, then smaller still, each downgrade a reminder of how far she'd fallen and how fast. Her mother, still recovering from the stroke, couldn't help beyond offering love and worry. Her brothers helped when they could, but they were students with their own struggles. The government assistance she'd once helped others access became her own lifeline, and she learned firsthand how the system was designed to exhaust rather than assist. She took jobs that didn't ask about her past, cleaning offices after hours, where the only question was whether you had a pulse and could push a mop, stocking shelves at warehouses where speed mattered more than credentials, selling handmade jewelry at weekend markets, where tourists bought pretty things without caring who made them. Some days the choice wasn't whether to eat, but what to eat. Some days it wasn't metaphorical. She'd stand in the grocery store with $10 and a baby pressing on her bladder, doing calculations that made her want to scream. Eggs or bread, milk or vegetables, prenatal vitamins or bus fare. She never missed a doctor's appointment, though. Walked when she couldn't afford the bus, sat in waiting rooms for hours when they overbooked, but she never missed one. The baby, her daughter, she knew somehow, deserved at least that. Deserved a mother who showed up even when showing up was the hardest thing in the world. The nurse at the clinic noticed the weight loss, the shadows under Kayla's eyes, the way she flinched when asked about the father. "You have support at home?" "I have enough." "That's not what I asked." "It's the answer I'm giving." The nurse handed her a list of resources. Food banks, housing assistance, programs for pregnant women in crisis. Kayla took the paper with numb fingers, thanked her with numb lips, and cried in the parking lot until her throat was raw. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be married, stable, preparing a nursery with the man she loved. Instead, she was alone, broke, preparing for motherhood, in a studio apartment where the heat didn't always work and the neighbors fought loud enough to shake walls. But alone, she was learning, didn't mean defeated. Broke didn't mean broken. And preparing for motherhood without him meant getting to do it on her own terms, without someone questioning every choice or making her feel small for caring too much. She talked to her daughter constantly, whispered promises while walking to jobs that didn't pay enough, sang lullabies while cleaning other people's offices, shared dreams about the future they'd build together from these ashes. "We're going to be okay, baby girl. I don't know how yet, but we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." The pregnancy advanced with determined indifference to her circumstances. Her belly grew round and obvious, making some jobs impossible and others harder. Strangers on buses offered seats with pitying looks. Cashiers asked about the father with that specific tone that meant they'd already decided he was absent. "He's not in the picture," she'd say, and leave it there. She didn't say his name. Not to strangers, not to friends, barely even to herself. Phil Salt became he or the father or someone I used to know, because speaking his name felt like giving him power he hadn't earned. He was a ghost, a mistake, a lesson she was still learning. When the contractions started 5 weeks early, she was stocking shelves at a dollar store on a shift that paid cash under the table. Her water broke between the cleaning supplies and paper products, a flood that made her gasp and grab the shelf for support. The manager called an ambulance, annoyed about the mess, about the disruption, about having to cover her shift. Kayla apologized through contractions, actually apologized for her body choosing this moment to bring life into the world. The ambulance came. She climbed in alone, no hand to hold, no partner to reassure her everything would be fine. Just her and the paramedic asking questions she could barely answer through the pain. "Someone we can call." No one. Baby's father, not available. The hospital was chaos and fluorescent lights, and a nurse who looked exhausted before Kayla's labor even began. They put her in a room with another laboring mother, separated only by a curtain, and she could hear the woman's family on the other side, husband, mother, sister, everyone excited and supportive and present. Kayla labored alone behind that curtain, gripping the bed rails, breathing through contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart to make room for new life. The nurse checked on her every few hours, efficient but not unkind, offering encouragement that felt thin and practiced. "You're doing great, honey. Won't be much longer." But it was longer. 18 hours of labor that felt like days, her body too small for the baby, trying to force her way out, the pain so consuming that Kayla understood why people believed in gods, because in moments like this, you needed something bigger than yourself to hold on to. Precious arrived at dawn, 5 weeks early and 4 pounds of furious life, screaming like she had opinions about being evicted. The nurse cleaned her quickly and handed her to Kayla, this tiny creature with her father's eyes and her mother's chin and lungs that worked just fine. "She's perfect." the nurse said. Small but perfect. We'll need to keep her in NICU for observation. Make sure those lungs stay strong. Kayla held her daughter for 5 minutes before they took her away to the special care unit. 5 minutes that felt like a lifetime and also like no time at all. She memorized Precious's face in those minutes, every wrinkle, every movement, every sound, because she needed to carry that image through whatever came next. The NICU became her home. She slept in the waiting room because the Ronald McDonald House was full and she couldn't afford a hotel. Showered in the public bathroom, ate vending machine crackers, and sat beside her daughter's incubator talking about the future they'd build together. We're going to be so happy, Precious. I promise you. Your name means valuable, cherished, and that's what you are, the most precious thing in this world. And I'm going to spend every day proving that to you. We don't need anyone else. We have each other, and that's enough. It's more than enough. Hospital social workers circled like concerned vultures, asking again about the father, about support systems, about whether she had a plan. Kayla said yes to everything, lied about the stability waiting at home, because she couldn't risk them deciding she wasn't capable, wasn't fit, wasn't enough. When Precious was finally discharged after 2 weeks, Kayla signed the paperwork with shaking hands and carried her daughter into the world, just the two of them against everything, and felt something inside her harden into steel. She'd been broken. Now she was building herself back. And this time, she'd build something that couldn't be destroyed by a man's fear or a board's greed or a world that valued profit over people. This time, she'd build a fortress, and Phil Salt would never get close enough to destroy it again. Chapter 5. The Birth of Steel. They wanted her to break. She chose to build. The apartment Kayla brought Precious home to was smaller than some people's closets, a studio where the bathroom door didn't close all the way, and the kitchenette was a hot plate beside a mini-fridge. But it was clean, safe, and hers, which mattered more than square footage. Precious slept in a second-hand bassinet beside Kayla's mattress on the floor. The baby monitor was a luxury she couldn't afford, so Kayla slept in 30-minute intervals, always half awake, always listening for her daughter's breathing. The first weeks were survival distilled to its purest form. Feed the baby, change the baby, sleep when the baby sleeps. Except Kayla couldn't sleep because she was calculating how to pay bills that kept arriving like threats. The hospital bill alone was catastrophic, a number with too many zeros that mocked her from the kitchen counter. She applied for assistance again, sat in those waiting rooms with Precious in a carrier against her chest, filled out forms that asked the same questions in slightly different ways. The caseworker, a tired woman with kind eyes and too many files, processed her application without judgment. You're eligible for WIC, food stamps, and childcare assistance once you're working. For now, focus on keeping that baby healthy and yourself fed. I need to work. I can't just... You need to recover from childbirth and establish nursing if you're planning to breastfeed. Work will come, but babies don't stay small. Take the help. That's what it's there for. Kayla took the help because pride doesn't feed babies, but every form she signed felt like surrender, like proof she couldn't do it alone. She'd gone from boardrooms to food banks in less than a year, and the vertigo of that fall sometimes made her physically sick. Her mother visited when she could, brought groceries she couldn't afford, and love she had in surplus. You're doing amazing, baby. Look at her! She's thriving. She's tiny, and I'm terrified every second of every day. That's called being a mother. You think I wasn't scared when I had you? I was 17 and alone, and convinced I'd mess up everything. But you turned out pretty spectacular. She touched Kayla's cheek. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm drowning and pretending I can swim. Same thing sometimes. Finding work with an infant was impossible through traditional channels. Interviews required childcare she couldn't afford. and jobs that paid enough to cover childcare, didn't want someone who'd need to leave for fevers and doctor's appointments. It was a trap designed to keep poor people poor, and Kayla was caught in it. So she found other ways. Cleaning officers brought Precious along in the carrier, the baby sleeping while her mother scrubbed toilets and emptied trash. It wasn't legal or safe by any official standard, but it was survival. And survival doesn't ask permission. A driver saw her once, late night, walking home from a cleaning job with Precious asleep against her chest. He pulled over, rolled down the window. "You need a ride?" Kayla's hand went to her phone instinctively, prepared to run. "I'm fine. Look, I've got daughters. It's 3 in the morning and you're walking with a baby. I'm not trying to start something, just offering to get you somewhere safe." She studied him, weathered face, wedding ring, exhaustion that matched her own. Sometimes you have to choose between caution and kindness, and she was so tired her legs were shaking. "Okay, thank you." He drove her home without speaking, didn't ask questions, just helped her out of the car at her building and waited until she was inside before driving away. Small mercies, she was learning, came from unexpected places. The breaking point came when Precious got sick. Just a cold, the pediatrician said, but to Kayla it felt apocalyptic. Her daughter's tiny body burning with fever, that cough that sounded too big for her small lungs, and Kayla powerless to do anything except cool cloths and prayers. The medical bill for that clinic visit, even with Medicaid, was more than she'd made all week. She sat on her kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, Precious finally sleeping after hours of crying, and looked at the bill with something beyond despair. Her phone was beside her, cracked screen and dying battery. She'd been avoiding social media, couldn't bear to see the life she'd left or the man she'd loved. But desperation makes you brave or stupid, often both, and she opened the camera. She filmed herself. No makeup, no filter, hair in a messy bun, wearing the same shirt she'd worn for 3 days. Behind her, you could see the tiny apartment, the bassinet, the evidence of struggle she'd been hiding. "My name is Kayla, and I just spent $18 I don't have on a doctor's visit for my daughter's cold. That's $18 that was supposed to be groceries this week. And I keep wondering when it gets easier, when the math of survival stops being impossible. But here's what I know. My daughter is healthy, fed, and loved. And that's worth more than any bank account." She posted it without thinking, without expecting anything, just needing to scream into the void. The void screamed back. Within hours, the video had 10,000 views. By morning, 50,000. Comments flooded in, mothers sharing similar stories, people offering to help, journalists asking for interviews. Someone started a fundraiser without asking, and within days it had raised $5,000. Kayla stared at the number, certain it was a mistake, that it would disappear if she looked away. But it stayed real, stayed possible, and she cried so hard she worried she'd wake Precious. She posted again, this time deliberately. "Thank you. I don't have better words than that. Thank you for seeing me, for seeing all the mothers doing impossible math every day. This is for all of us." The followers grew. She started posting regularly, not polished content, just truth. Videos of Precious learning to smile, of budget meals that stretched too little into barely enough, of the strategies she'd developed for surviving when survival felt impossible. People keep asking about the father. "Here's what you need to know. I'm Precious's mother and father both. I'm her everything, and I'm enough." The audience responded to her refusal to play victim or seek pity. She wasn't asking for charity. She was sharing reality and building community with thousands of women who recognized their own struggles in hers. Brands started reaching out, small at first. Diaper companies offering free products in exchange for honest reviews. Then bigger, baby food sponsors, clothing lines, parenting podcasts wanting her perspective. She said yes to anything ethical, no to anything that felt exploitative. Within 6 months, she had 200,000 followers and enough income to quit the cleaning jobs. Within a year, she'd published a memoir about her journey, not a sob story, but a survival manual, practical and unflinching. 24 Hours became a bestseller not because of drama, but because of dignity. She never named Phil, never revealed details that would expose Precious to scrutiny, just told the truth about falling from grace and learning to fly differently. The interviews came next. Morning shows, podcasts, conferences about entrepreneurship and resilience. She spoke about single motherhood, about the systems that fail poor families, about building something from nothing when nothing is all you have. And always, always, Precious was with her. Not exploited or paraded, but present, the reason for everything, the proof that struggle could produce strength. Kayla started Second Shift Support, a non-profit providing childcare subsidies and job training for single mothers. The programs Phil once questioned now existed because she'd created them herself, funded by her platform and the community she'd built. She rented a real apartment, 2 bedrooms with heat that worked, and a kitchen where she could cook real meals. She bought a used car that didn't break down every month. She could afford Precious's preschool, her own therapy, health insurance that didn't require choosing between care and rent. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable. And stability felt like a miracle after years of freefall. She dated occasionally, careful, cautious, never bringing anyone around Precious until she was certain. But nothing stuck. Her heart was still a crime scene she wasn't ready to let anyone investigate, still marked by the man who'd given her the best and worst of her life. "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy?" Precious asked one evening, the question casual while they read books before bed. Kayla had prepared for this, had entire speeches ready, but they all dissolved when faced with her daughter's honest eyes. "You do have a daddy, baby. He wasn't ready to be one, but that's his loss, not yours. Because you're the most precious thing in this world, and anyone who doesn't see that doesn't deserve you." "Is he a bad man?" "No, he's a scared man, and sometimes scared people make bad choices." "Are you scared?" "Every single day. But I choose to be brave anyway, because I have you." Precious considered this with her usual seriousness. "I think you're the best mommy in the whole world." Kayla held her daughter close, breathing in baby shampoo and innocence, and felt something inside her unclench. They were okay. Better than okay. They were happy, the two of them building a life that didn't need anyone else to be complete. What she didn't know, Phil had been watching. Every video, every interview, every article about her rise from the ashes he'd left her in. Sullivan tried to keep the content from him, but his new assistant, one of the few people who remembered how he smiled when Kayla was around, made sure he saw everything. He watched his daughter grow up through screens, calculating her age, doing math that confirmed what his gut knew. He'd reached for the phone 1,000 times and put it down 1,001. Certain he'd destroyed any right to their lives. But watching Kayla at a conference, speaking about resilience while Precious colored in the front row, something inside Phil finally cracked open. He'd spent 5 years building walls to protect himself from the pain of what he'd lost. It was time to tear them down. Chapter 6. The Rise. She didn't climb back to where she fell from. She built something higher, something that couldn't be knocked down by anyone's doubt. Precious turned 3 the same month Kayla's book hit the bestseller list. They celebrated with a party in their apartment, just the two of them and her brothers and mother. Eating cake Kayla had baked at 2 in the morning because sleep was still something she borrowed in pieces. Make a wish. "Baby?" Precious closed her eyes, small hands gripping the edge of the table, and blew out the candles with determined force. When Kayla asked what she'd wished for, her daughter smiled with that specific knowing that small children have before the world teaches them to lie. "A puppy. And for you to stop being sad when you think I'm not looking." The observation landed like a gentle blow. Kayla pulled her daughter close, kissed her forehead. "I'm not sad, baby. I'm happy. The happiest I've ever been." "Then why do you cry sometimes at night?" Children see everything. Kayla had forgotten that, or maybe never knew it. Sometimes adults cry even when they're happy, Because feeling things is what makes us human, and I never want you to think feelings are something to hide. Okay, can we have cake now? Yes, baby, we can have cake now. The book tour took them across 12 cities in 6 weeks. Precious became part of the show, not the focus but present real, proof that single mothers could build empires while building lives. Audiences loved her interruptions, the way she'd climb into Kayla's lap during Q&As or offer commentary about the hotel pools they'd visited. "My mommy is the strongest person in the world," Precious announced at one event unprompted, and the audience erupted in applause. Kayla's platform grew beyond social media into something concrete. Second shift support expanded to 5 cities, helping hundreds of single mothers access childcare and training. She hired women she'd met in waiting rooms, in food bank lines. Women who understood struggle wasn't a character flaw but a circumstance. The non-profit partnered with companies willing to offer flexible schedules, remote work options, on-site childcare. Kayla used her story and her platform to shame corporations into treating working mothers like humans instead of liabilities. "You can afford to give someone flexible hours so they can pick their kid up from school," she said in one viral interview. "What you can't afford is the moral bankruptcy of forcing parents to choose between their children and their survival." Media called her a voice for the voiceless. She called herself someone who refused to be silenced. The difference mattered. Journalists asked constantly about Precious's father. Kayla developed a practiced response that revealed nothing while honoring her daughter's privacy. He made his choice not to be involved. "I respect that choice by not discussing him publicly. This is about our story, not his absence." But the speculation persisted. Online theorists analyzed her timeline, connected dots to Salt Global Enterprises, found old photos of her at company events. Some figured it out, most just gossiped. Kayla ignored it all, focused on building something they couldn't tear down with rumors. She bought a house, nothing extravagant but theirs. 3 bedrooms in a neighborhood where Precious could ride her bike without Kayla having a panic attack. A backyard with space for the puppy they'd eventually get. A kitchen where she could cook real meals and not worry about the hot plate catching fire. Moving day. She stood in the empty living room with Precious running circles around her and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Pride. Not the fragile kind that depends on external validation, but the deep, unshakable kind that comes from surviving hell and building heaven from the ashes. "We did it, baby girl. This is ours. Can we paint my room purple? We can paint your room any color you want." Life developed rhythms. Precious started preschool, where she was popular and bossy and completely herself. Kayla developed friendships with other mothers, women who didn't need her story explained because they had their own. She dated occasionally, a teacher who was kind but boring, an artist who was interesting but unreliable, a lawyer who checked all the boxes except the one that mattered. None of them were Phil. She told herself that was good, that she didn't want someone who reminded her of the worst period of her life. But late at night, when Precious was asleep and the house was quiet, she'd remember the man he'd been before fear destroyed him, and something in her chest would ache for what they'd lost. She never tried to contact him. Pride, maybe, or self-preservation, or the knowledge that he'd had 5 years to reach out and chose silence. If he wanted to know his daughter, he knew where to find them. The fact that he hadn't told her everything she needed to know about his priorities, the speaking invitations increased. Universities, conferences, corporate events, everyone wanted to hear about resilience and transformation. Kayla said yes to opportunities that paid well, and no to exploitation disguised as exposure. "You could write another book," her agent suggested. "People want more of your story." "My story is still being written. Ask me again when I know how it ends." She appeared on morning shows, shared panels with other entrepreneurs, wrote op-eds about corporate responsibility and living wages. Every platform became an opportunity to advocate for the women still drowning in the systems she'd escaped. The difference between me and the millions of single mothers still struggling isn't that I worked harder or wanted it more. It's that I got lucky. A video went viral, people responded, opportunities opened. But luck shouldn't be the difference between survival and destruction. We need systems that support families instead of punishing them for existing. Her social media following hit 2 million. Brands offered partnerships worth 6 figures. She could have lived comfortably on that income alone, but she funneled most of it back into second shift support, expanding services, hiring more staff, helping more families. "You're building an empire," her brother said, proud and slightly awed. "I'm building a safety net." There's a difference. Precious grew into a small person with opinions about everything. She liked purple and dinosaurs and books about girls who saved themselves. She asked questions that required honest answers Kayla wasn't always prepared to give. "Why don't you have a husband?" "Because I haven't met anyone worth marrying again." "You were married before?" "Once, a long time ago." "What happened?" He forgot that love requires courage, and I remembered that I deserved better. "Oh, can we get ice cream?" These conversations happened in fragments, pieces of truth Precious was old enough to handle without drowning in complexity. Kayla never lied, never painted Phil as a villain, just offered age-appropriate honesty that would build over time into full understanding. The invitation to the National Business Ethics Summit arrived in March. Humanitarian Leadership Award for her work with second shift support, keynote speaker. Black tie event, the kind of recognition that validated everything she'd built. She accepted before reading the full details, before seeing that Salt Global Enterprises was the primary sponsor, before understanding that accepting meant inevitably crossing paths with the man she'd spent 5 years avoiding. When she realized, she considered backing out. Called the organizers, started to explain, then stopped. Why should she hide? Why should his presence dictate her choices? She'd earned this award. She'd built something extraordinary from nothing, and she'd be damned if she let him take that from her. "I'll be there," she told the organizer. "Wonderful. Mr. Salt is presenting the award, actually." "I hope that's not—" "It's fine. We're professionals." She hung up before they could hear her heart breaking all over again. 5 years of healing, of building armor, of convincing herself she was over him, and the thought of standing on a stage, accepting an award from his hands, made her want to throw up. But she'd do it. Not for him, but for Precious, for every woman she'd helped, for the girl she'd been who thought leaving meant losing. She'd show him exactly what he'd thrown away, exactly what she'd become without him. She'd show him that his absence had been her freedom. And if seeing her broke his heart the way he'd broken hers, good, let him feel it. Let him live with the weight of what he'd destroyed and what she'd built despite him. The night of the event, she dressed in armor disguised as elegance, a dress that cost more than her first 3 apartments combined, makeup that made her look powerful instead of pretty, hair styled to perfection. Precious wore purple, her favorite color, and looked like a small princess with attitude. "Mommy, you look like a queen." "Thank you, baby. You look like the most beautiful princess in the world." "I know." Kayla laughed, genuine and full, and felt ready. Ready to face him, to reclaim her narrative, to close this chapter once and for all. She had no idea that seeing Precious would destroy Phil in ways 5 years of guilt never had. No idea that the careful armor she'd built was about to be tested by the one person who'd ever seen through it. No idea that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Chapter 7, The Collision. Fate doesn't ask permission. It just arrives when you're least prepared and rewrites everything you thought you knew. The venue was the kind of place that intimidated through beauty. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, servers in white gloves carrying champagne that probably cost more than Kayla used to make in a week. She walked through the entrance holding Precious's hand, chin up, shoulders back, every inch of her radiating the confidence she'd built from survival. People recognized her. Not everyone, but enough that whispers followed her through the crowd like ripples. Heads turned, conversations paused, phones came out for discreet photographs. She'd become someone worth noting, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Mommy, everyone's staring. Let them look, baby. We earned this. The ballroom filled with executives, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, people who'd inherited their power or bought it, very few who'd clawed it from nothing the way she had. Kayla accepted congratulations with grace, made small talk with sponsors, and kept Precious close, a reminder of why she was here. The organizer found her backstage. "Miss Benita, we're so honored to have you. The program starts in 15 minutes. You'll speak after Mr. Salt's opening remarks. Then he'll present the award. Is there anything you need? Ask 5 minutes alone before we start." "Of course. The green room is yours." Kayla took Precious into the small room, closed the door, and breathed. Her hands were shaking. Her stomach was a war zone. She'd given hundreds of speeches, faced thousands of people, but none of it compared to the terror of seeing Phil again. "Are you scared?" Precious asked, watching her mother with that unnerving perceptiveness children have. "A little." "Why? You're the bravest person I know." "Bravery doesn't mean you're not scared, baby. It means you do the thing even though you're terrified. Then you're the bravest and the most scared." "That's impressive." Kayla laughed despite herself, pulled her daughter close. "How did you get so wise?" "I had a really good teacher." From the ballroom, she heard the announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our opening speaker, CEO of Salt Global Enterprises, Phil Salt." Her heart stopped again. Through the closed door, she heard his voice for the first time in 5 years, that deep timbre that used to whisper promises in the dark. Now addressing hundreds about ethics and responsibility. "We gather tonight to honor those who've transformed business into a force for good, who've proven that success and morality aren't opposing forces, but complementary ones. This award recognizes someone who embodies that philosophy, who built something extraordinary from circumstances that would have destroyed lesser spirits." He was talking about her. Phil Salt, who'd given her 24 hours to leave, was standing on a stage praising her resilience. The cognitive dissonance made her dizzy. His speech continued, beautiful and empty, the kind of rhetoric that sounded meaningful without risking anything real. When he finished to polite applause, the organizer knocked on Kayla's door. "You're up." She stood, smoothed her dress, took Precious's hand. "Ready?" "I was born ready, Mommy." They walked to the stage entrance, waited in the wings. The introduction came. Her bio, her achievements, the journey from nothing to something. Standard stuff, except it was her life being reduced to bullet points for an audience of strangers. Please welcome our Humanitarian Leadership Award recipient, Kayla Benita. She walked onto that stage, holding Precious's hand, and the first thing she saw was Phil standing in the wings on the opposite side. Their eyes met across the space, and something passed between them that couldn't be named. Recognition, regret, something too complex for language. He looked older. Not bad, just weathered in ways wealth couldn't hide. The confidence she remembered had become something harder, more defensive, and his eyes, when they landed on Precious, widened with shock so pure it was almost painful to witness. The audience stood, applause washing over Kayla like absolution. She guided Precious to a chair at the side of the stage, made sure she was settled with crayons and paper, then stepped to the podium. "Thank you. I'm not comfortable with applause yet. Probably never will be. Because 5 years ago, I was standing in a very different place, making very different choices about what survival looked like." The room went quiet, the kind of attentive silence that meant people were actually listening. I worked in these spaces once, not as an honoree, but as someone trying to prove I belonged. I believed that changing systems from inside was possible if you worked hard enough, cared loud enough, refused to accept that profit, and people were enemies. And for a while, it worked. Until it didn't. She didn't look at Phil, but she felt him watching, felt the weight of his attention like physical pressure. I learned that night what many of you already know. Systems protect themselves. And people who threaten those systems, who demand better, who insist that humans matter more than margins, they get removed, politely, legally, but removed nonetheless. I found myself alone, pregnant, and facing poverty that I'd never experienced even in my hardest moments. And I had a choice, break or build, feel sorry for myself or figure out how to survive. Blame the world or change it. She paused, let the words settle. I chose to build. Not because I'm special or stronger or more deserving than the millions of women facing similar circumstances. I chose to build because my daughter deserved better than a mother who gave up. So I worked jobs that didn't appear on resumes. I accepted help that pride said I should refuse. I told my story when shame said I should hide. And slowly, painfully, I built something new. Precious waved from her chair, completely unaware of the magnitude of the moment, and the audience laughed softly. That's Precious. She's the reason for everything. She's proof that our worst moments can produce our greatest gifts if we're brave enough to keep moving forward. Kayla's voice strengthened, filled with the passion that made her audiences lean forward. But here's what I want you to understand. I got lucky. A video went viral. People responded. Opportunities opened. But luck isn't a strategy. Luck shouldn't be the difference between survival and destruction. We need systems that support families, that treat employees like humans, that recognize childcare isn't a personal problem, but a societal responsibility. The award I'm receiving tonight recognizes work I'm proud of. But that work exists because I fell through every safety net our society claims to provide. I built second shift support because I lived the nightmare it's designed to prevent. And until every mother has access to childcare, flexible work, living wages, until no one has to choose between feeding their children and paying rent, this work isn't finished. She looked directly at the audience, at the executives and entrepreneurs who held power they probably never questioned. You have the ability to change this, not through charity or feel-good initiatives, but through structural changes that treat people like they matter. Flexible schedules, remote work options, on-site childcare, living wages. These aren't radical ideas, they're basic human dignity. And if your business model can't accommodate them, maybe your business model needs to change. The applause started before she finished, building to something thunderous. People stood, not out of politeness but genuine response, and Kayla felt something crack open in her chest. This was vindication. This was proof that leaving had been right, that building had been worth it, that she'd transformed pain into purpose. Phil walked onto the stage carrying the award, and suddenly the space between them was just 10 feet of polished wood and 5 years of silence. He looked at her like she was a ghost, like he couldn't believe she was real. And something in his expression was so raw it almost broke her carefully constructed composure. "Kayla Benita," he said, voice rougher than it had been during his speech, "for extraordinary humanitarian leadership and dedication to transforming systems through action and advocacy, we present you with this award." He extended the crystal statue, and she had to step forward to take it. Their hands touched for less than a second, but electricity shot through her arm, muscle memory recognizing what her mind had tried to forget. "Thank you," she said, professional and distant, and turned to the audience for one final statement. "I accept this on behalf of every woman who's doing impossible math to survive, every mother choosing between dignity and desperation, every person who's been told they don't matter. You matter, we matter, and this work is for you." More applause, cameras flashing, and Precious running onto the stage, completely ignoring protocol, wrapping her arms around Kayla's legs. "You were amazing, Mommy." Kayla lifted her daughter, held her close, and for a moment forgot the audience existed. "Thank you, baby." When she looked back, Phil was still standing there, frozen, staring at Precious with an expression that combined shock and recognition and something that looked like grief. His eyes moved between them, doing calculations. Seeing what he'd probably suspected but never confirmed, Precious noticed him watching. waved with the casual friendliness of a child who hasn't learned suspicion. "Hi, I'm Precious." Phil opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Kayla with eyes that begged for confirmation, for denial, for anything that would make sense of what he was seeing. Kayla just turned and walked off stage, her daughter in her arms, leaving him standing in the spotlight with the weight of 5 years crashing down on him all at once. Let him figure it out. Let him live with the knowing that he'd had a family and threw it away for ego and fear. Let him understand that he'd missed everything. First steps, first words, first days of school, because he'd chosen pride over love. She owed him nothing. Not explanations, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. She owed him exactly what he'd given her, absence. And if that destroyed him, good. Some people need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt. Chapter 8. The Pursuit. Desperation looks like courage from a distance. Up close, it's just a man finally understanding what he lost and knowing he deserves the emptiness that followed. Phil couldn't move. Stood on that stage watching Kayla walk away with their daughter Jesus Christ, their daughter, and felt 5 years of carefully constructed denial crumble into dust. The audience was dispersing, the event continuing, but he was paralyzed by recognition so complete it felt like dying. Precious had his mother's eyes. The shape, the color, that specific way they caught light. She had Kayla's smile but his stubborn chin. She was 4, maybe 5, which meant God, which meant Kayla was pregnant when he gave her the ultimatum, when he watched her leave, when he convinced himself he was better off. Alone, he'd forced his pregnant wife out of their home and spent 5 years telling himself it was for the best. The nausea hit so fast he barely made it off stage before vomiting into a trash can in the wings. His body rejecting the truth his mind could no longer avoid. An organizer approached, concerned, but he waved them away with shaking hands. He found his assistant, Rachel, who'd been with him long enough to read his face. "I need Kayla Benita's contact information. Now, sir, I don't care what you think. Get me her information or I'll find it myself." Rachel pulled out her phone, efficient as always, and within minutes had an address, phone number, email. Phil stared at the information like it was written in code, like if he looked hard enough it would reveal how to undo 5 years of devastation. He tried calling first. The number rang twice before an automated message. "The person you're trying to reach is not accepting calls from this number. Blocked." Of course she'd blocked him. Email next. He spent 2 hours crafting the message, deleting and rewriting, trying to find words that could possibly bridge the canyon between them. Finally sent something that was probably inadequate but at least honest. "Kayla, I saw her. I saw Precious. And I understand now what I was too broken to understand then. I'm not asking for forgiveness or access or anything I haven't earned. I just need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. For being a coward when you needed courage. For choosing fear over love. For throwing away the only real thing I've ever had. I know it's too late, but I needed you to know." The email bounced back within minutes. Address blocked. He showed up at second shift support offices the next morning, flowers in hand, like some pathetic romantic comedy character, trying to buy his way back into a life he'd destroyed. The receptionist recognized him, and her expression went from professional to protective in seconds. "Mr. Salt, how can I help you?" "I need to see Kayla, please. Just 5 minutes. Miss Benita isn't seeing anyone without an appointment." "Then make me an appointment. Her schedule is full for the next 6 months. He knew dismissal when he heard it. "Set the flowers on the reception desk. Can you give these to her? And tell her I need to talk about Precious. She deserves Mr. Salt." The receptionist stood, her voice dropping to something harder. "I know who you are, what you did, and you showing up here with flowers like that fixes anything. You're lucky Ms. Benita is a better person than most, because if it were me, I'd have called security already. I'm not trying to—" "You gave her 24 hours to leave. She's giving you eternity. Consider yourself lucky. The second attempt happened at one of her speaking events at a university. Phil bought a ticket under a fake name, sat in the back row, and waited through her entire presentation, brilliant as always, funny and fierce and everything he'd fallen in love with, before raising his hand during Q&A. She called on him without recognition at first. He stood, and the room shifted when people realized who he was. This question is for Ms. Benita. How do you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it? And the room went silent. Kayla's face transformed from warm to glacial in seconds, and Phil saw the exact moment she decided how to play this. That's a complex question. Forgiveness isn't about what someone deserves. It's about freeing yourself from the poison of holding grudges. You forgive so their mistakes stop controlling your future. But, she paused, met his eyes directly. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. You can forgive someone and still choose not to let them back into your life. Both things can be true. She moved to the next question before he could respond, and Phil left before the event ended, knowing he'd made it worse. The third attempt was born of desperation. He tracked down her brother through social media, found where he worked, showed up during lunch break. Her brother recognized him immediately, and his expression promised violence. "Get the hell away from me. I need to talk to Kayla, please. I know I don't deserve—" The punch came fast, catching Phil in the jaw hard enough to knock him backward. He didn't fight back, just took it, probably deserved worse. You gave my sister 24 hours to leave. You threw her out pregnant and alone, and now you show up wanting what? Forgiveness. Access to the daughter you abandoned? Her brother stood over him, shaking with rage. She rebuilt herself from nothing while you sat in your mansion, feeling sorry for yourself. So here's what you get, nothing. You get the same nothing you gave her. Now disappear before I really hurt you. Phil drove home with a split lip and the certainty that he'd approached everything wrong. Treated the situation like a business problem instead of the family he'd destroyed. The fourth attempt was a letter. Not email, actual paper, handwritten over 10 pages late at night when insomnia and regret kept him company. He poured everything onto those pages, his parents' death and the walls he'd built. Sullivan's manipulation and his willingness to believe it. The fear that made him push away the only person who'd ever seen him clearly. I was raised to believe love was weakness and vulnerability was death. My parents died and I survived by feeling nothing. Trusting no one, building walls so high that I convinced myself I was safe. Then you walked into my life and saw through every defense. You made me feel everything, joy, fear, need, love, so consuming it terrified me. And instead of being brave enough to sit with that terror, I let fear win. I let Sullivan poison me against you because it was easier than admitting I was terrified of losing you, so I pushed you away first. I know now that Precious is mine. Our daughter, the baby I was too broken to celebrate, too scared to want. And I've missed everything. Her birth, her first steps, her first words, every moment I can never get back. That's on me. That's the consequence of my cowardice. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking for forgiveness I haven't earned. I'm just asking for the chance to be her father, to show up, to build trust slowly, to prove that I'm doing the work to become someone worthy of knowing her. You've done everything alone, and I know you don't need me. But maybe if I work hard enough, if I'm patient enough, if I become the man I should have been 5 years ago, maybe I can be someone she'd want to know. I've included a check for child support, 5 years' worth, calculated from when she was born. I've also set up a trust fund in her name that she'll access at 18. This isn't about buying my way back. It's about taking responsibility for my absence. Please just think about it. Not for me, for Precious. Because every child deserves a father who shows up. He had the letter couriered to her house, included the check and trust documentation. 3 days later, everything came back unopened. Returned to sender. He sat in his car outside her house, not close enough to be creepy, just close enough to see the lights in the windows, to imagine the life happening inside that he wasn't part of. saw Kayla pull into the driveway, Precious bounding out of the car with a backpack and that specific joy kids have when coming home. He wanted to run to them, to introduce himself, to explain everything. Instead, he drove away, knowing his wanting didn't matter, that he'd lost the right to his own desires when he chose fear over love. Sullivan was gone now, fired and cut off, but the damage he'd helped create remained. Phil had spent 2 years in therapy unpacking the fear and attachment issues that made him vulnerable to manipulation. Had learned words like avoidant and defensive, devaluation and self-sabotage, could now name exactly how he'd destroyed the best thing in his life. Understanding didn't change what he'd done. It just made him capable of not doing it again, if anyone ever trusted him enough to try. Weeks passed. Months. He redirected company profits toward programs supporting single mothers over the board's objections. Started volunteering at organizations similar to Kayla's, not to run into her, but to understand the work she'd built. Tried to become worthy of the forgiveness he didn't deserve. Then her lawyer called. "Mr. Salt, I'm representing Kayla Benita. She's agreed to meet with you once. Only once. Not for your benefit, but because Precious is starting to ask questions about her father, and Ms. Benita believes her daughter deserves better than lies." Phil's heart stopped. Saturday morning, 10 a.m., Wilson Park. She'll bring Precious. You'll meet them in the south playground area. Ground rules. You don't touch either of them without permission. You don't raise your voice. You don't make promises you can't keep. And if at any point Ms. Benita feels uncomfortable, the meeting ends immediately. Understood. Understood. Thank you. Tell her I'm not a messenger service. Mr. Salt, just be there. The line went dead, and Phil sat in his office, hands shaking, and tried to figure out how to compress 5 years of regret into whatever minutes Kayla was willing to give him. How do you apologize for destroying everything? How do you introduce yourself to a daughter who grew up without you? How do you prove you've changed when change takes years to demonstrate? He didn't know, but he'd be there at 10 a.m., ready to try. Chapter 9, The Reckoning. Showing up is only the first step. The real work is staying when everything in you wants to run. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt cruel in its beauty. Clear skies, warm sun, leaves turning colors that poets write about. Phil arrived at Wilson Park 45 minutes early, parked where he could see the south playground, and waited with his heart trying to break through his ribs. He'd barely slept, kept running through scenarios, imagining conversations, preparing speeches that dissolved the moment he tried to practice them out loud. How do you condense 5 years of regret into sentences that don't sound hollow or self-serving? At 9:58, Kayla's car pulled into the lot. He watched her get out, walk around to open the passenger door, lift Precious from her car seat. The mundane intimacy of it, mother and daughter doing what they'd probably done thousands of times, broke something in him. He'd missed everything. Every car ride, every morning, every moment that made a life. They walked toward the playground, Precious running ahead while Kayla followed at a measured pace. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup he could see. She looked real, present, more beautiful than his memory had preserved. Phil got out of his car on legs that barely held him, walked toward them with his hands in his pockets because he didn't trust them not to shake. Kayla saw him coming, said something to Precious that made the little girl stop and turn. And then he was standing in front of them, his daughter. His wife, his former wife, whatever she was, and words failed completely. Hi. Brilliant opening. Absolutely brilliant. Kayla's face was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Phil! Precious stared at him with unnerving focus, taking in his face, his clothes, his entire presence with the brutal honesty of children. You're tall. Yeah, I am. My mommy says you're my daddy, but you were scared. Jesus. Right to it. No preamble, no softening. Phil knelt down so he was eye level with her, and Kayla stepped slightly closer, protective but allowing. Your mommy's right. I was very scared, and I made terrible mistakes because of that fear. I should have been there when you were born, when you were learning to walk, for every moment. And I'm so sorry I wasn't. Why were you scared? Because I didn't know how to be a good father. My parents died when I was young, and I grew up thinking feelings were bad things. So when your mommy and I had you, instead of being excited, I got afraid that I'd mess everything up. And that fear made me do something really hurtful. I pushed your mommy away when I should have held her closer. Precious considered this with that specific seriousness children have before cynicism arrives. Did you say sorry to my mommy? I'm trying to. You should bring her flowers. She likes purple ones. Despite everything, Phil almost smiled. That's good advice. Thank you. I'm going to play on the swings now. Bye. And just like that, she was done with him, running toward the playground with the attention span of a child who'd satisfied her curiosity. Phil stood slowly, faced Kayla, and found himself completely disarmed by her stillness. She wasn't crying or angry or any of the emotions he'd prepared for. She was just waiting, letting him make the first move, giving him enough rope to either climb out or hang himself. I don't have a speech prepared. I wrote about 40 versions, but they all sounded wrong. He dragged a hand through his hair, nervous energy needing somewhere to go. So I'll just say this, I was wrong. About everything. I let Sullivan poison me against you, but that's not an excuse because I chose to believe him. I chose to doubt you instead of fighting for us. And when you told me you were pregnant, I said it wasn't a good time instead of celebrating the miracle we'd created. He had to pause, had to breathe through the shame. I gave you 24 hours to leave because I'm a coward who destroys things before they can destroy me. And then I spent 5 years telling myself it was for the best, that you were better off, that I'd done the right thing. But I was lying. To myself, to anyone who'd listen. The truth is, I was terrified of being loved that completely, of being needed that much, of failing you the way I failed at every relationship in my life. Kayla's expression remained neutral, but her arms crossed over her chest, a barrier he'd have to earn the right to break through. I've watched you build something extraordinary, watched every video, read every article, saw how you turned pain into purpose while I sat in my empty house feeling sorry for myself. And seeing you on that stage, seeing Precious, understanding what I threw away. His voice cracked. I can't undo the last 5 years. I can't give back what I took. But I can show up now. I can do the work. I can prove that I'm capable of being the father Precious deserves, even if I'm years too late. Are you done? Kayla's voice was calm, almost clinical. No, I need you to know I've been in therapy. 2 years now. Working through my attachment issues, the trauma from my parents' death, all the ways I learned to equate vulnerability with weakness. I'm not telling you this to make excuses, just to show you I'm trying to fix what's broken. And I've set up a trust fund for Precious. She'll have access when she's older. I've calculated 5 years of child support and I want to... Stop. Kayla held up her hand. You think money fixes this? You think writing checks and going to therapy makes up for 5 years of absence? No, I know it doesn't. I'm just trying to... You're trying to feel better about yourself. That's what this is. You saw Precious and guilt finally caught up to you. So now you want absolution. You want me to say it's okay, that you're forgiven, that you can be a father without having done any of the actual work of fatherhood. The words hit like physical blows, but he took them because he deserved them. You're right. Of course I'm right. Do you know what it was like? Being pregnant and alone, going to appointments where they ask about the father, and I have to say he's not involved. Giving birth with no one holding my hand, bringing her home to an apartment the size of your closet, and having to choose between electricity and food. I'm not done. Do you know what it was like, watching her grow up with your face, your mannerisms, knowing she'd eventually ask why her father didn't want her? preparing for that conversation since she was born, trying to find words that wouldn't break her heart. You get to feel guilty now, 5 years later, after I've already done all the hard parts. You get to show up when the worst is over and play father to a child who's already extraordinary without you. I know I don't deserve. No, you don't. You don't deserve her smile or her trust or the chance to be her father. But here's the thing. This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what Precious deserves. And she deserves a father who shows up, who's honest, who doesn't bail the second things get hard. Can you be that? Not the version of yourself you perform for boardrooms, but the real, flawed human version who's willing to fail and try again. Phil met her eyes, saw the test in them, the challenge. I don't know. But I want to try. I want to show up every day and prove that I'm capable of change. Not for you. I know I destroyed any chance of us. But for her. Because she didn't choose any of this. And the least I can do is give her a father who's trying. Kayla stared at him for a long moment, and he saw the war happening behind her eyes. Protection versus possibility, rage versus grace. Finally, she spoke. I forgive you. The words landed like a bomb in reverse, destroying defenses instead of building them. Phil felt his knees buckle slightly, had to lock them to stay standing. What? I forgive you? Not because you've earned it through these desperate attempts or this speech. I forgive you because holding on to that anger was keeping me chained to who I was when I needed you instead of embracing who I've become without you. Forgiveness is for me, not you. It's how I move forward. Kayla, but forgiveness doesn't mean trust. Trust is built in minutes, hours, days of showing up consistently, of putting Precious's needs above your guilt, of being the father she deserves, not the husband you failed to be. You want to know her? Fine, but we do this on my terms. Supervised visits at first, consistent schedule. You don't get to show up when convenient and disappear when it's hard. And if you hurt her, if you give her hope and then abandon her the way you abandoned me, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. I understand. Whatever terms you set, I'll follow them. I just want the chance to don't make promises yet. Show up first. Prove you're capable of consistency. Then we'll talk about promises. She walked toward the playground, and Phil stood there processing what had just happened. She'd forgiven him, agreed to let him know Precious, given him a chance he absolutely didn't deserve. Why did it feel like he'd just signed up for the hardest test of his life? Kayla called Precious over, and the little girl came running, out of breath and happy. Kayla knelt down to her level. Baby, remember how I said your daddy was scared, but that he might want to be in your life? Well, he's here now, and he wants to get to know you. Would that be okay? Precious looked at Phil with those eyes, his mother's eyes, God, and then back at Kayla. Will you still be my mommy? Always, forever. Nothing changes that. Okay, can he push me on the swings? You always push wrong. Kayla laughed despite herself. I do not push wrong. You push too high. It's scary fun, but mostly scary. Phil felt something crack open in his chest. I can push you on the swings. If that's okay with your mom. Kayla looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the weight of 5 years, the scars he'd left, and the tentative possibility of something new. 1 hour. Then we leave. And Phil, don't push too high. She's brave enough without encouragement. Got it. Not too high. Precious grabbed his hand, small fingers wrapping around one of his, and pulled him toward the swings, chattering about school and her favorite color, and a book she'd read about dinosaurs. Phil followed, barely breathing, trying to memorize everything about this moment. Behind them, Kayla watched from a bench, arms wrapped around herself, and felt the weight of 5 years begin to lift. Not disappear, it would never disappear, but transform into something different. Something like hope. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was the messy, complicated beginning of rebuilding. And she had no idea if Phil would follow through, if he'd keep showing up, if he'd prove capable of the consistency he promised. But she'd given him the chance. Not for him, but for Precious. who deserved a father willing to fight for her. And maybe, just maybe, Phil Salt had finally found something worth fighting for. Chapter 10. The Beginning. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life. The first visit lasted exactly 1 hour. Phil pushed Precious on the swings, not too high as instructed, and listened to her explain the social dynamics of preschool with the seriousness of a diplomat discussing international relations. Kayla watched from her bench, ready to intervene, but trying to give them space. When the hour ended, Precious hugged him goodbye without prompting, her small arms barely reaching around his waist, and said, "You're not as scary as I thought you'd be." That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. The second visit happened the following week. Same park, same bench, but this time Phil brought a book Precious had mentioned, something about a girl who befriended dragons, and they sat in the grass while he read to her, doing voices that made her giggle. Kayla watched him stumble over the story, clearly uncomfortable with performance, and saw something she'd forgotten, his willingness to look foolish for something that mattered. The third visit, Precious asked if they could get ice cream after the park. Kayla almost said no, protective of routine and boundaries, but Phil waited quietly for her decision without pushing. One scoop, then home. At the ice cream shop, Precious ordered purple chocolate chip because of course she did, and Phil got the same just to see her smile. They sat at a small table, and Kayla watched her daughter and the man who'd once been her husband navigate conversation like strangers learning each other's languages. "Do you have a job?" Precious asked, licking her cone with focus. "I run a company. It's not as exciting as it sounds." "What's the company do?" "We help other businesses work better." "It's complicated. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain." Phil laughed, genuine and surprised. "You're right. That's a cop-out. We basically help companies treat their employees better, make sure they're being fair and ethical, like what my mommy does." "Yeah, kind of like what your mommy does." Over the following months, the visits became routine. Phil showed up every week, sometimes twice, never missing a scheduled time. He learned Precious's allergies, her favorite songs, the specific way she liked her sandwiches cut. He attended her preschool graduation, sitting in the back row while Kayla sat in front, and when Precious saw him, she waved enthusiastically and whispered loudly, "That's my daddy." He started small, reading books, pushing swings, buying ice cream, but gradually earned more time, more trust. Kayla watched him carefully, looking for signs of the man who'd pushed her away, but found instead someone working hard to be different. He went to therapy. He showed up consistently. He put Precious's needs ahead of his comfort. They established boundaries. Phil could see Precious twice a week, always with Kayla present at first, then supervised by family, eventually, after 6 months of consistency, alone for short outings. He paid child support without being asked, contributed to Precious's education fund, never weaponized money or used it to buy affection. And slowly, carefully, they built something fragile. Not a family in the traditional sense, but a functional co-parenting relationship based on their daughter's needs instead of their broken history. Kayla and Phil barely spoke directly at first, or communication through lawyers, or brief exchanges at handoffs. But gradually, out of necessity and Precious's questions, they started having actual conversations. Stiff, formal at first, then slowly more natural. "She asked about our wedding," Kayla said one afternoon at pickup. "What did you tell her?" "That we loved each other once, but love isn't always enough. That sometimes people make mistakes that change everything." "Did she ask what mistakes I made?" "She's 4. She asked if we had cake." Phil smiled sadly. "We had cake, purple frosting." "I remember." The shared memory hung between them, painful and beautiful. They'd been so young, so certain that love conquered everything. Neither of them knew yet how hard everything could be. One evening, 8 months into this new arrangement, Phil called Kayla instead of texting. "Precious mentioned wanting to learn piano. I wanted to check with you before offering to pay for lessons. You don't have to ask permission to contribute to her interests. I know, but I also don't want to overstep or make decisions without you. The consideration, the respect for her boundaries, felt like proof he was actually changing. Piano lessons would be great. Thank you. Kayla? Yeah? Thank you for this, for giving me the chance to know her. I know I don't deserve it. You're right. You don't, but Precious deserves a father who shows up, and you're doing that. So, keep doing that. They weren't friends. They weren't even friendly most days. But they were building something functional from ruins, and that felt like its own kind of miracle. Precious's birthday arrived, and for the first time, Kayla invited Phil to the party. Not as a guest of honor, just as Precious's father, present but not central. He brought a thoughtful gift, art supplies Precious had mentioned wanting, and stayed for exactly as long as invited, leaving before overstaying. Thank you for including me, he said to Kayla as he left. Thank Precious. She asked if you'd be here. I'm not doing this for you. I know, but thank you anyway. 1 year into this new arrangement, Precious asked the question Kayla had been dreading. Why don't you and Daddy live together? They were in the kitchen making dinner, just the two of them. Kayla set down the knife carefully. Because sometimes people hurt each other in ways that can't be fixed. Your daddy and I loved each other once, but we weren't good for each other. We made each other sad more than happy. So we chose to live separately so we could both be better. Are you still sad? Sometimes. But mostly I'm happy, because I have you, and that's the best thing that ever happened to me. Daddy seems sad sometimes, too. He probably is, but that's something he has to figure out, not something you need to fix. Precious considered this with her usual seriousness. I think you should both be happy, together or separate. It doesn't matter as long as you're happy. Wisdom from a 5-year-old. Kayla pulled her daughter close. When did you get so smart? I was born this way. That evening, Kayla thought about what Precious said. About happiness, about choosing it regardless of circumstances. She'd built an extraordinary life from the ashes Phil left behind. She had her daughter, her work, her purpose. She'd transformed pain into something meaningful. Was she happy? Most days, yes. Was there a part of her that still ached for what they'd lost? Also, yes, both things could be true. Phil called that night. I know this is unusual, but I wanted to tell you something. I fired my entire board. Well, replace them with people who actually believe in ethical business practices instead of just profit margins. Why are you telling me this? Because you were right about everything. And I spent 5 years protecting systems that didn't deserve protection, while pushing away the person who was trying to make me better. So I'm fixing it. Not to impress you or win you back or anything like that. Just because it's the right thing to do. Kayla felt something shift in her chest, some old wound beginning to scar over. That's good, Phil. I'm glad you're doing that. I'm trying to be someone Precious would be proud of. Someone you wouldn't regret letting into her life. You're getting there. Keep showing up. Keep doing the work. I will. Kayla? Yeah? I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. Not just sorry for leaving, but sorry for every moment I made you feel small or questioned your worth. You were always extraordinary. I was just too broken to see it. Kayla closed her eyes, felt tears threatening. I know, and I've forgiven you, not because you earned it, but because I needed to let go of the anger to move forward. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I'm not letting what you did control who I'm becoming. Fair enough. Good night, Kayla. Good night, Phil. 2 years into their co-parenting arrangement, something shifted. Phil picked Precious up for their weekend together, and Kayla watched them drive away without the fear that used to accompany his absence with their daughter. He'd proven himself consistent, reliable, present. He'd become a father. Not perfect, he still struggled with emotions, still defaulted to solving problems with money when presence was what Precious needed. But he was trying, learning, showing up even when it was hard. Kayla had started dating again. Nothing serious, Just coffee with a kind man who made her laugh and didn't need her story explained. When she mentioned it to Phil during a handoff, she watched for his reaction. That's good. You deserve someone who appreciates you. Are you seeing anyone? No, I'm focusing on being a father and running my company ethically. The rest can wait. Some part of Kayla that she didn't want to examine felt relief at his answer. But she buried it, reminded herself the chapter was closed, that they were building something new that didn't include romantic reconciliation. One evening, 3 years into their co-parenting journey, Precious was in bed, and Kayla and Phil sat in her living room having a necessary conversation about school choices. They'd become comfortable around each other again, not like they used to be, but functional. She's thriving, Phil said, looking at photos on Kayla's wall. You've done an incredible job raising her. We've done a good job. You've been present, consistent. That matters, but you did the hardest parts alone. I can't ever make that right. No, you can't, but you can keep showing up moving forward. That's enough. They sat in companionable silence, and Kayla realized something startling. She didn't hate him anymore. Didn't love him either, not romantically, but she didn't hate him. They'd built something new from the ruins of what they'd been. Not a marriage, but a partnership focused entirely on their daughter. Was it enough? Maybe. Was it what she'd dreamed of years ago? No, but dreams change, and sometimes the life you build from broken pieces is stronger than the one you'd planned. Thank you, Phil said suddenly, for not giving up on the possibility that I could change, for letting me prove I'm capable of being better. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Precious. I know, but thank you anyway. Kayla looked at him, this man who'd destroyed her and whom she'd rebuilt herself despite, and felt peace. Not forgiveness in the fairy tale sense, not reconciliation, just peace with what was and what could never be again. You're welcome. Now go home. Precious has school tomorrow, and you have that early meeting you mentioned. He stood, gathered his things. At the door he paused. If you need anything, for Precious or yourself, I'm here. Not as your ex-husband, but as someone who owes you more than I can ever repay. I'll remember that. After he left, Kayla sat in her living room, in the house she'd bought with money she'd earned, surrounded by the life she'd built from nothing, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, complete, not because Phil was back in their lives, not because they'd reconciled or reunited, or any of the things movies promised, but because she'd survived the worst and built something beautiful anyway, because her daughter was happy and healthy and growing up with two parents who'd learned how to put her first. Because healing didn't mean the damage never existed. It meant the damage no longer controlled her life. This wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning, the kind that acknowledged pain while building toward hope. The kind that said broken things could be repaired differently, maybe even stronger than before, and sometimes that's better than happily ever after. That survival transformed into something like grace.